All right, I think it's time to get started. So, welcome to this Writing New South Wales First Friday event, part of an online series in which we talk to industry leaders across the writing and publishing sector to ensure writers have the information they need to build sustainable careers. I'm Rowena Tuziak, Membership and Operations Manager at Writing New South Wales, and today I'll be talking to Benython Oldfield, Literary Agent and Director of Zeitgeist Agency. Before we start our conversation, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal and Wongal people of the Eora Nation, from whose lands this event is being broadcast today, and pay respects to their elders and storytellers, past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands from where you're joining us today, so feel free to make your own acknowledgement of country in the chat box if you would like to do that. Now, audience members are muted to ensure the best sound quality, but you can put any questions that you have for Benython in the chat box, so we can ask as many of them as we have time to at the end of the session. You can also use the chat box to communicate with other attendees or to let our staff know if you're having any technical issues. They'll do their best to help. When in doubt, the best solution is to exit the Zoom and to rejoin it with the link in your email. To see our speakers, toggle your screen to speaker view in the top right-hand corner of the Zoom window. To see all the other attendees, toggle your view to gallery view. We do recommend you stay on speaker view throughout the event. We are recording this event, so if you drop out or if you have to leave early, you will get a chance to watch it on the website later. And now, welcome to Benython Oldfield.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm getting excited about all these books and writing that must be happening out, 75 people there. That's a lot of work being done.
Yeah. And it is our very great pleasure to have you joining us today to talk all things writing and publishing. So thank you, Benython, for joining us.
Pleasure.
All right, well, let's get started. You've spent over 14 years at Zeitgeist Agency as Director, Agent and Publicity Manager. But let's take a step back to earlier in your career. How did you get your start?
Well, I actually started as a journalist working at the ABC and a lot of commercial radio and TV stations and things like that. And I kind of fell into the idea that I liked the idea of long form storytelling more. And then I ended up at what was then Random House and had kind of entry point there, which was marketing and publicity, which is a really interesting part of publishing in a way, because you get to see, the end of the process and what kind of happens to authors once they've been through the whole publishing process. That obviously is a big monolith. It's a really interesting place to work, but you don't really have much choice as to what you work on. And yeah, so then I was really lucky. They actually sent me to China on this sort of fact-finding tour. They wanted to expand into Asia, and I met this very charismatic bravado field agent called Toby Eady, who's now passed away. And he kind of took us around China and showed us the ropes. And I thought, oh, this looks really interesting, and representing authors and, taking them to the rest of the world. And then I kind of heard about the Frankfurt Book Fair and the London Book Fair. And yeah, it just seemed really exciting part of publishing and a really amazing part of publishing if you could actually get your authors out of Australia and into the world.
Yeah.
So that was my real aim, was to, take people as far as we could and get them a world readership and try to allow them to actually be writers, full time. So that was always the ambition.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit more about Zeitgeist Agency and what it takes to make a great literary agent?
I don't know. That's a very good question. Well, I think, look, for me, a lot of it is gut feeling. And I know that sounds a bit crazy, but it really is. I mean, there are obviously a lot of elements that come into play. Contacts, obviously extremely important, like right through the publishing industry. Respect from publishers that, and actually now more so, not just publishers, but movie and TV people as well, that what you're giving them, you're not just selling them a pup, you've actually really thought about what you're giving them. And so when you actually give them something, you're not wasting their time. They know that when you hand something over to them, be it a movie producer or a publisher, that they are going to want that book and they're going to have to pretty much fight for it, because, the only things that we really take on are really ambitious projects that we know will pretty much sell more than 10,000 copies. Of course, we do take on other things that we think are culturally significant in some way for Australian culture, but they're kind of at the lesser end of what we need to do. We are a business, we're looking at numbers like publishers are. So we're kind of like, in a way, pseudo publishers that are, looking for projects and making it as easy as possible in that process, that what arrives on their doorstep is pretty much near complete, something to really excite them. And it's, it's built up over a number of years. From the international network, we have an office in Brussels, and those guys sell, the books out internationally, and also manage a whole network of sub-agents, which helps deliver that kind of passion factor, like throughout the company, and, right through to those sub-agents in places like Estonia and Russia and all sorts of different parts of the world. So, yeah, I mean, that's part of it. You have to have the hard conversations. You have to have the hard conversations with authors. You have to have the hard conversations with publishers. You have to be gentle. You have to be sensitive in some ways, because obviously, or you guys know, you've put your heart and soul into these things for sometimes, decades. And, that's something that is a real, like, I have utmost respect for that effort. And I know how hard it is to kind of get, that step up. I don't want to depress you. We'll talk about one depressing thing at the beginning of the process, but there was this figure that came out from the Australian Booksellers Association conference, which was on this week. And I was really shocked by it. It was basically saying that 98% of Australian books sell less than 1,000 copies. Right. So that's what we're kind of up against.
Can I ask, Benython, how many Australian authors you currently represent?
So we represent about 60, but out of that 60, I'd say that sort of 30 are actually, working on something new, or are very much kind of in my life on a pretty much daily basis. So, yeah. Yeah,
right. So you've mentioned there the global reach of some of your authors. Winning international awards and some works being turned into film and television. So, for example, Jasper Jones by Craig Silvey, Holly Ringland and her debut novel, The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. So what was it about their works that told you they were something special?
Well, there's kind of two elements in this adaptation process. One of them is generally that for a film and TV kind of deal, there generally needs to be a massive canvas for a novel. Like, it really has to have a kind of epic proportion to it, but it has to have a very filmic moment in it. The other thing, though, is because film and TV is so expensive, it can't be too big. So it's kind of like the sort of a massive sort of sci-fi phenomenal sort of situation won't really work. Sorry, I'm just turning off my phone here. Because, budgets are only so much. In Australia, particularly, the film and TV budgets, range from about 2 million to about 10 million. And so the constraints of the story has to kind of be around that. Jasper Jones actually was a perfect example in that it was an $8 million film, and there was enough money to make, a decent film out of that story. Holly Ringland's Lost Flowers of Alice Hart has been bought by the same people that made Big Little Lies, and that's been greenlit now with Sigourney Weaver as one of the leads. Very exciting. That kind of scenario. It's a much bigger canvas. It's going to be 7-part series. It's tens of millions of dollars in the budget for that. So anything that's a bit quiet is not really going to work.
Right.
It does, I mean, again, it's this chicken and egg scenario. You know, if something has momentum and a following here in Australia, it really gets the film and TV people a bit more interested.
Mm.
They're notorious for not necessarily reading that much, so you kind of have to give them, you know, potted kind of breakdown of the book and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it generally has to have a level of success here before film and TV will kind of start to look at. They love the idea of having a built-in audience. So yeah, that's, you know, because it just means that as a starting point, they have those people that will probably want to watch it because they've read the book, all that kind of thing. So yeah.
Do you think, I mean, you've got a very interesting background in media as well, and I don't know if you know what I'm about to reference, but your television production. Yeah, well, I shall.
Oh
I'm
no, yeah.
thinking of
Look,
something.
I think it all kind of flows into each other now. I mean, it's you know, it's. I mean, the thing is that there are so many different pathways and so many different avenues for different people and different writers and different personalities, and you know, I think that's one of the major things, is there is no kind of one avenue, and that's the really complicated and infuriating part of this business. That, you know, you might have a writer who hates social media and is completely, you know, just doesn't do it and would rather focus on the writing, and that's completely fine. But you might also have someone that, you know, is really into it and, you know, sort of builds an audience around that. My business partner in Brussels, actually last week, I said to her, oh, you know, we've been following this writer for a while on Instagram. And she basically said, get over yourself. Like, you haven't even read it. Like, you know, and I was like, yeah, you're true. That's very true. So yeah, so look, and the film and TV thing, you know, it's still pretty luck based as well. You can just be lucky that it's the right timing. But yeah.
Thanks, Benython. I was also alluding there to your you being a segment producer for Australia's Most Wanted. I don't know if you wanted that to be public or not.
No, that's fine. I mean, weirdly, back in the day, that was Australia's Most Wanted, obviously a crime show that was on TV. I mean, back then, I did that about 20 years ago. Australian crime wasn't really respected internationally, novel-wise. It's fascinating now to see that, you know, that is one of the genres that is working in Australia and internationally. Suddenly there's this respect for Australian crime. I would say that it's generally not set in cities though. It generally does still fulfill that kind of international cliche of Australia, that we're just a big kind of dust bowl in the country somewhere. And, you know, it's very, I mean, someone can probably correct me, but I can't think of a recent, you know, Australian crime book that's set in a city that is extremely successful. Obviously, Leanne Moriarty is probably the exception, but it's not like strictly crime, I suppose.
What sort of trends have you noticed since the start of the pandemic in terms of the writing that's being produced, or in the appetites of publishers and readers, you know, in relation to genre?
Well, I think the big shift was that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of Me Too kind of novels and books, and a lot of real excitement that those stories were being told, and that there was a real shift to the importance of those stories. I have to say, during the pandemic, because, you know, some of that stuff can be quite heavy as well, there's been a shift to looking for things of more levity, things that are a bit more uplifting. And so in the non-fiction world, it was interesting that now Phosphorescence, Julia Baird's book, you know, has been winning a lot of awards, it's been having crazy sales, you know, quite an uplifting, introspective sort of book, looking at, you know, how to be happy and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that's emerged out of the pandemic for sure. Saying that, you know, the Australian crime thing is still on a bit of a roll. Like, it is definitely, you know, something that publishers are all looking for and are publishing a lot of, and yeah.
So do you get a sense of what the next big thing is going to be?
I wish I knew. Look, the one thing that a lot of people have been saying to me is, you know, where's the Australian Sally Rooney?
Right.
Being that sort of like millennial kind of book whereby it's 20 somethings kind of trying to work out their lives. Look, it's interesting that it hasn't kind of really emerged. I mean, those books are really hard to write. They can be cliched, they can be kind of boring, they can be, you know, so yeah, that's an area that I think we'll probably see a breakthrough at some point, that we see a really popular kind of book in that area. Look, there seems to be always space, and a few of the publishers have started to take on new clients. Few of the publishers started to take on new people who are looking for historical fiction.
Right.
It's quite interesting that seems to always be a bit of a powerhouse, and that might come down to, you know, the majority of readers being sort of over 50 or whatever. Like, that's a real powerful kind of area. Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about book sales and print runs for literary versus commercial works? You know, how many copies make a bestseller in different genres?
Well, this is something that's always quite contentious, because it seems that anyone that's published pretty much calls themselves a best-selling writer. But I mean, the touchstone kind of number I sort of use is 10,000 copies. I mean, I think that's a pretty legitimate, solid figure in Australia. There are no kind of hard and fast rules around this.
Right.
But yeah, as that report came out, that like only 2% of Australian books sell more than 1,000 copies. I mean, that it's a slightly traumatic figure. I think look, I'm not entirely sure. I was thinking, God, that must include textbooks or something as well, because it just seems too high. I mean, publishers really, for sustainability, are probably looking at a minimum of a 5,000 copy print run. And if you think your kind of royalty out of that is about $2 a book, then, you know, that's a $10,000 kind of book basically for the author. So yeah, that's sort of about the sustainable level of publishing. And look, 5,000 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's still quite hard to sell 5,000 copies in Australia alone. It's quite a complicated thing to do.
Yeah, right. You know, we've talked a bit about some of the doom and gloom, but I'm wondering if generally, are you feeling optimistic, you know, given the global changes that have taken place due to the pandemic? You know, how has that impacted publishing? Do you feel, do we have something to look forward to?
Yeah, no, look, I think, you know, publishing has really survived through the pandemic. That's been one of the great winners. Sales have actually gone up a little bit. And the only downside of the whole thing is that, you know, people are buying names that they know. So the discoverability factor is a bit more complicated during COVID, because you can't, you know, we're not going into bookstores as much and browsing and all that kind of thing. Case in point for that was another figure that came out of this Australian Booksellers Association conference, which was that Booktopia's sales had gone up 500% during the pandemic. So like, that's just phenomenal.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And they basically decided that they weren't going to do any marketing because they just couldn't cope. It just five times the amount of books are now being sold through Booktopia than were previously. I mean, not harm, I shouldn't say harm. It's wonderful to see like such exuberance for that. But I was thinking, like, I wonder if the, you know, independent bookstores are losing a bit out of that. But it doesn't seem like they are. You know, it does seem like they're still doing okay. I haven't really heard of any bookstores sort of shutting down over this period, which is really lovely to hear. And I suppose that's all up to us to make sure that, you know, we do buy local and we do buy independent, even though sometimes it's a bit more expensive and that kind of thing.
Yeah, of course, it's really important.
Just jumping quickly, you were asking about sales and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So publishers love the idea of being able to get their books into 2 other chains apart from the independents, the discount department stores, to the big W's, the Kmarts, that type of thing, the Targets, and also the chains, which is like the Dimmicks and the QBTs and the WH Smith and that kind of area. So for that kind of thing, you know, Big W might buy 3,000 copies of a book, which is great. The scary side of that sometimes is that if there's not momentum for that book, they can all come back because
Yeah, right.
the sale or return policy that exists after 3 months. And so for smaller publishers, it's a very risky endeavor. You know, it's almost a bit of a complication for them. If that many books come back, they just lose so much money from that printing and distribution. And so yeah, there are just a lot of nuances around all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. And given that, as you've said, the appetite tends to be for names that people recognise, Holly Ringland was a debut author. Is it rare for you to take on a debut author?
It's not actually. Debuts are kind of really where my passion lies. I mean, even though we've been going for, I don't know, 13 years now, we're still quite a young agency in a way. And amazingly, you know, a lot of our authors have only really written 1 or 2 books, like that they haven't kind of been churning out a lot. So a lot of our business is from debuts and people that are writing their first books. And I mean, in a way, that's where the real excitement for me comes from, because it's kind of like a new discovery. You know, there is nothing more exciting than finding something new. And in fact, that is a little bit of a tip that I have for everyone, be it approaching a publisher or an agent. And this is a bit cheeky, but the one way to kill off an opportunity is to say that it's been read and rejected by someone else. So you've just got to be a bit wily about that and kind of go to, you know, publisher or agent with, you know, real enthusiasm and belief in your project, and, you know, don't lie to them if they ask you that question, obviously. But yeah, it's strange. Everyone just really wants to find the next big thing. And so once you hear, like, people are very generous and say, oh, you know, such and such agency recommended that we should get in touch. But it just kills it for me. It's just like, nah. Like, why would someone pass on something if it was amazing? Like, they just wouldn't. Like, it wouldn't. Like, there are a lot of gatekeepers. Actually, this is one of the weird things. People always say, oh, there are too many gatekeepers. It's too hard to get through. And look, it might be true on one level because it doesn't allow everything to get published, but on another level, there really are a lot of avenues. And I think if something is at a commercially publishable level, it will find its way. You just have to be a little bit patient, or, you know, try all the avenues that, you know, Writing New South Wales can advise you on, and all that kind of stuff. Because yeah, and the thing is that not all writing is commercially viable, unfortunately. Like, it's just the harsh reality of it. So you might have written something really wonderful and really interesting, but it just may not find its way through the path to sort of commercial viability, I suppose. And of course, people are wrong too. It can be quite subjective, and you know, different tastes for different people, different moments. I mean, when we submit to publishers, sometimes it also means that, you know, they have something similar on their list, or you know, they're just too overwhelmed to actually kind of really focus on something. And, you know, that does happen a lot. There's a lot of, you know, to be read, to be looked at kind of scenarios in publishing on agents and publishers' desks.
Yeah, right. I'm sure there's going to be many people in the audience who are going to want to ask this question, and I'm sure we'll go into greater detail later. But in terms of things like self-publishing, which I guess people might consider if they've been rejected because it is so competitive, I'm wondering actually how the rise of self-publishing, the rise of digital platforms, how has that impacted publishing, traditional publishing? And how does it compare with, say, for example, the changes that have taken place due to the pandemic? Is it still an issue?
Look, I think, everything has its place, and self-publishing can be a really satisfying experience, especially if you have, like an online network of people. And one of the things that really kind of makes me quite upset is if I hear stories from authors that contact me about being taken for a ride by sort of charlatan self-publishers. And, there are a lot of them out there. I'm not 100% sure. When I was on the board of Writing New South Wales, we did kind of recommend people every now and again, specific people that were more legitimate to work with in that arena, that were honest and, didn't promise too much and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes the desire to be published is so strong that people are prepared to hand over that kind of cash. But yeah, it's pretty irksome. It's a slightly evil industry in some ways. It's interesting when you Google like literary agents and stuff, a lot of the dodgy kind of powerful self-publishing platforms come up. And yeah, so look, I can't name any of them now, but I know that there's certainly, legitimate people and good people to work with and people that are honest. And it just depends what you want to achieve. The problem with self-publishing is that there isn't really any distribution with it whatsoever. And one of the major strengths of being traditionally published is that, there's marketing and publicity and distribution. Distribution, to bookstores, which is a really strong starting point for getting the word out. Just this sort of machine that's in place to actually make that work. With self-publishing, like there really is no sort of avenues for getting the word out about your work, except for those sort of online bulletin boards and friends and all that kind of stuff. And I know there are success stories from people who've kind of done it that way. But I think if you go down that path, you just have to have sort of modest desires, I suppose, as to what the outcome will be, and, be happy with your work. But yeah, I had this kid come to me actually talking about that about 10 years ago now. He was like, I think he was 19. He printed 10,000 copies of his book and it was in his parents' garage. And, 10 years ago, it was exorbitantly expensive to print, much more so than today. So yeah, just the pitfalls of that can be devastating and really painful sometimes. So.
And I should at this point mention that on our website, we do have information, resources for writers specifically about self-publishing. So please have a look at that if you're considering going down that route. I would like to remind the audience that you can pop your questions in the chat box if there is something that you'd like to ask Benython, and hopefully we'll get time to answer those questions later in the conversation. Benython, you're a man of many talents. You're also the publicity manager for the Sydney Writers' Festival. How did that go this year, particularly after the cancellation of last year's event?
Well, I think the festival this year was pretty remarkable, and we're also extremely lucky that it happened, in the kind of COVID gap, I suppose, in some ways. Look, the focus on Australian literature was just wonderful. I absolutely loved that. The publishers really loved it. And the audiences came in the same sort of numbers as they would previously to a festival. So normally the festival would have about 50 internationals that are there in person. And, they're exciting, but I think the real positive of this is that, it was kind of like, well, those guys are glamorous and interesting and all that kind of stuff, but actually we really have a lot to say here, and our authors have a lot to say here. And it was wonderful from that point of view that there was a real respect for our own, and a real happiness and excitement around our own authors. I mean, we had 3 Indigenous writers open the festival this year. That's never been done before. It's normally an international. Yeah, it was a super lovely celebration of what's here. I mean, we have so many great writers, we have so many great stories, it's really hard to keep up with. So anyone that's outside Sydney or missed the festival, there's an awesome podcast channel. You can listen to all the talks there for free. Just a little plug for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you get onto that. And yeah, it was an absolute delight to see so many Australian writers this year. So we were very lucky with the downtime of the pandemic. Benython, I've got some questions here that I know people are going to want to know the answers to. Beyond the words on the page, what are some factors that might be taken into consideration by literary agents and by publishing houses when it comes to selecting authors and their work? For example, are author platforms important, that kind of thing?
Yeah, look, it's a really, really complicated one, because honestly, if a really good manuscript came to me and, the person was anonymous, I'd be happy with that. Like, that's something to work with. I think, you just can't be someone that you're not. So if you love Instagram, if you love Twitter, go for it. Build a platform, Facebook, do it, enjoy it, have fun with it. I just feel that, there is a lot of emphasis on that. It's not ultimately supersonically important. Like, if you write a cracker of a book and spend your time writing a better book, then that will make you famous, and then you'll have social followers. Right. Like, I mean, publishers obviously are suckers for people that have great followers, amount of followers and all that kind of stuff. It's helpful. I just think it's better to, maybe be published in a couple of smaller areas first, like literary magazines and, all those kind of things. And yeah, I'm just, maybe it's my generation, but I'm not entirely sold on the absolute need to have platforms.
Okay. And so what strategy, so let's assume that your book is picked up, or maybe you're self-publishing and you want to promote it. What sort of strategies would you recommend for writers who want to promote themselves and their work?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a lot of kind of simple things, like obviously all those platforms, are good to be on, because, there will be some pickup from them. There are little tricks, like on Amazon, you can put up your bio there with your book when it's published. The online promotional thing is really complicated again. I mean, Facebook, you can, I don't like saying this, but on Facebook and Instagram, you can pay for your ads, your posts have more exposure and all that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that from a self-publishing point of view, it's just extremely difficult. Like, going to bookshops is near impossible, because, that bookshops are very kind of closed-minded. They'll be like, well, you're self-published, we can't really help you. So yeah, it's a hard slog if you haven't got that traditional machine behind you. If you've got the traditional machine behind you, the publisher kind of does all this stuff, basically.
Yeah, yeah. What about once you're actually picked up, though? I mean, is it important to, for example, go to libraries and do talks, and go to schools and that kind of thing? Does it depend on the genre?
Yeah, it will depend a lot on the genre. I mean, all of that stuff is helpful. I'm a big believer in events. I'm a big believer, if you are picked up, meeting booksellers. Generally, all this stuff has to be kind of generated through the publishers, though. As an example, like back in the day, I used to do a lot more of it, but I used to take our authors around booksellers. We used to do trips from Brisbane to Sydney, you know, when I had a bit more time, you know, and we'd organise to meet booksellers in their homes, being in their bookshops in small country towns and things like that. And, you know, they don't see many authors, so pretty wonderful for them and pretty wonderful for the author to make that connection. They'll remember that author forever and hand sell their books. And I think you still can't really get beyond that kind of personal connection in publishing. The publishers also do things like potentially would have dinners with booksellers or get you at bookseller conferences and all that kind of stuff. That's very powerful. Generally, again, you sort of have to be at the top of their slate to get that sort of attention and help. But yeah, I think the main thing with the bookseller interaction is that it sort of has to be done by an intermediary. Like, it's very hard to sort of force yourself upon booksellers and stuff like that. Like, I think it's more that like the publisher or the agent sort of has to organize that for you, because just the idea that, you know, you're a bit desperate if you're kind of doing it yourself. Yeah, it's tough. You just sort of need to get across that line in order to have that exponential kind of growth and acceptance, I think.
Yeah, right. Thank you for that. I'm curious to know, Benython, why writers need literary agents. What do you do? Can you tell us? Pitch to us.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I mean, I've sort of written up a document that's, you know, about 3 pages long now as to what we do. But I mean, the main kind of thing is we do a lot of the heavy negotiation between the publishers and the author. And okay, so for instance, we'll probably try to get more money for you as a starting point. And that might think, oh, well, a lot of you might say, well, I'm not that interested in money. Well, the interesting part about that is that the more a publisher pays for a book, the more focus and attention they're actually going to give you, because they need to make that money back. If you say, oh, look, I don't mind, or I'll take $1,000, I'm happy to be paid, I'm happy to be published, it's quite a dangerous place to be, because you're right at the bottom of their scale of importance then in terms of, you know, within that publishing company. You're also fighting within that publishing company for attention. So our main job is to make sure that you are really a high priority for that publishing house. So that'll start with the money. I mean, on top of that, there are just so many people in the chain when you do get published that it's about, for instance, looking at the jackets, making sure the jacket's fine. If the jacket's not fine, do some negotiation around that. Just as an anecdote, author of mine recently, their book was being rejacketed. Sometimes they'd be rejacketed on the second year in a smaller, cheaper format. And it was just an abysmal cover. And, you know, we had to negotiate our way kind of through that. Publishers obviously don't want to really do that because, you know, they think they kind of know exactly what's best for the market and all that kind of thing. But, you know, you as an author want to be able to absolutely adore that jacket in order to spruik it to the world. If you hate your jacket, I mean, it's such a dampener. Like, you know, you have to sell this thing that you hate the look of. Like, you want to kind of adore it. So there's that kind of negotiation. There's obviously, you know, the film and television negotiation. There's the international sales. You know, we look after the international sales. There's also, you know, being really strict with the publisher about the marketing, making sure that that's, you know, at a top level, that the publicist and the publicity tour is really organised incredibly well. And generally, you know, an agent is really good as well in the light that in publishing houses, things change a lot. People leave, they move on, they go to different places. We're like the static throughout all of that. We just keep a steady kind of keel for you when that kind of stuff happens. And, you know, there are shifts in publishing houses, that there are CEOs that leave, there are just stuff going on that you won't have any kind of knowledge of being outside. But we kind of give you all that information, and also to make the choice around who you want to be published by, because we really know the internal workings of all those publishing houses, and the efforts they've put in before. Maybe some people are lazy, or just that kind of stuff. So
absolutely. Are there any things that writers should be looking out for if they're signing a contract with a publishing house? Maybe they don't have a literary agent. Subsidiary rights, are they important? Things like that.
Yeah, look, they can be. I mean, my suggestion with that, I don't know if Writing New South Wales has a service to look at contracts, but I know the Australian Society of Authors certainly does.
Yeah.
They are very standard, the contracts, most of the time. Subsidiary rights are the sort of extra rights like audio, and which is actually becoming quite big now. It can even be a third of an author's income. If you sell your book to a publisher and they want to take all international rights, you want to be really careful about the percentages that they're taking out of that deal. You can withhold film and television rights, and in fact, it's probably a very good thing to do. The basic kind of rule around all the extra rights the publishers want, which you have to make a decision on, would be, can I exploit these rights? Can I actually sell them? If you really, truly look deeply and say, well, I don't have the networks, I don't have an agent, I don't have the contacts to do this, my suggestion would be that you just need reduce the publisher contract in your favour as much as possible, and hang on to as high percentages as possible, because they do have people that are selling internationally. They do have people that are selling film and TV as well. It's just that the transparency isn't as good when you give all those rights to a publisher. You never really know what's going on. There's no reporting process. You kind of just put the goodwill across to them and hope that they actually do, a good job. So it is again a sort of a catch-22 situation. My suggestion would be anyone that is on the cusp of getting a deal, that you check with the Australian Society of Authors, check with Writing New South Wales, go to some agents, say, look, I've been offered a deal, can you help me? It's actually people will be very responsive to that, basically. So
yeah, thank you. And what about author advances? Do they still exist? Is that something that can be negotiated?
Yeah. Look, they definitely do exist, and they should exist because it's work that you've done, and the publisher needs to respect that and to pay advances. So absolutely. Strangely, I don't know if it's because the agency's progressed or whether things have shifted in the publishing industry, but there's been a lot of six figures kind of thrown around recently, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 for books. And, of course, that's sort of at the top end of the spectrum, right down to, $6,000 at the other end. But yeah, no, there absolutely exists. Just for those of you that don't know, when you get paid in advance, you have to pay that money back in a way. So the way that you pay that back is every sale of a book that happens, you get 10% of that sale roughly. So you can just think it's, basically $2 a book. So whatever your advance is, if your advance is $10,000, you're going to have to sell 5,000 copies before you see any more money. Yeah.
Yeah, right. All right, thanks for that. So I guess we should probably find out what are common mistakes that people make when they're pitching to literary agents. Could you give us your top tips on what to do or what not to do?
Well, I think the no bells and whistles thing is pretty good. Just clear, concise, simple writing. You don't have to big yourself up. You just have to write 1 or 2 paragraphs that are really nicely written. And I think it's always good to maybe reference a writer from the agency that you like or have read, or you know, it's kind of just to show that you're actually, I mean, to sort of have that slightly personal approach. I think always happens. Like, for instance, if someone writes to me and says, you know, I adored Holly Ringland's Lost Flowers of Alice Hart. You know, this was my favorite part in the book. You know, and then you kind of go on to this is my story and my book. It's just an acknowledgement that it's not just a kind of a thing that's been sent out to everyone, you know, on the planet kind of thing. It's a strangely, yeah, sort of ego-driven thing in a way, that you want to think that someone's kind of chosen, you know, taken a bit of effort and sort of chosen, which is really complicated because, you know, obviously it's hard to know who's who and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I think that to me shows that someone kind of is a bit into the kind of publishing industry, or kind of gets a little bit of, you know, what you're trying to do. Like, for instance, we don't really do any sci-fi or anything like that. So if someone was sending me a sci-fi book, I'd kind of want them to say why they were sending it to me. Yeah. Like, because otherwise it's a bit like, you know, I just not my genre. Like, and I think there is an Australian Literary Agent Society online, which has sort of got all the agents listed and all their information. We've actually just joined that after, you know, not being in there for 14 years, so we're not up there yet. But that's kind of a good starting point.
Great. And are you at Zeitgeist Agency currently open to new submissions?
Look, we were going to open in July. I haven't flicked the switch yet. So keep a watch out. We will be putting up a new kind of form pretty soon. Our submission process is very easy. We just want to see 500 words, basically. As simple as that. So yeah, just to kind of give us an idea of what it's about, so we can sort of shift it easily and quickly, and yeah.
Great. No doubt people will be eagerly awaiting those submissions opening so they can send it through, because we have a lot of participants in here today who I'm sure are keen. I hope everyone who is watching has been posting their questions in the chat box. Very shortly, I'm going to start asking those questions. I have one final question for you, Benython, which is any advice on someone who wants to pursue a career as a literary agent? What would a young you say to yourself about choosing this career?
Well, I think there are lots of sort of entry points. I think working in a bookstore is a great way to do it. I think working in a publisher, I actually had a young kid contacted me yesterday who said, you know, can you do some free work experience? You know, I don't like the idea of people working for free, but, you know, if someone's offering it, you know, we'll buy him lunch, and, you know, he'll probably end up working for us. So yeah, I mean, I think just be polite, approach people, don't be shy. I mean, it's a bit like getting your work seen by people. You know, that the hardest thing is to kind of put yourself out there and to send those emails, and, you know, just keep it clear and simple and short, basically. That would be my advice. Yeah. And coming back to the literary agent thing, I mean, it's a bizarre sort of career. You can't really study it anywhere, so you sort of need to learn on the job. Some agencies have assistants. I've got an assistant that's here at the moment. You know, one day she might work towards wanting to be an agent. So yeah. Okay,
great. All right, thanks, Benython. It's time for our questions from the audience, and we've got quite a few. So we've got a question from Cecilia. She asks, what do you think the factors are for the sales numbers to be so low for Australian authors? Are they super low?
I think it's pretty common globally. Yeah, probably. I don't know what the figures are internationally, but it's probably very similar. I think the problem is that we all just go for the names we know. Like we're not prepared to be, you know, take a risk and buy a book for $30 that someone that we never heard of. Complicated process to spend that money. But I mean, that's why independent bookstores are great, because you do have that opportunity to take that risk, I suppose. And look, you know, there's so much rating around now, you know, Goodreads, you know, Amazon. So we kind of, we get a lot of information before we even kind of pick a book now. So yeah, there's not as much chance for something random to be sort of picked up. It has to be pretty lauded, I think, before people will take the risk and the time. And yeah, it's not just the money, it's the time as well. It's the investment.
Mm.
You know, we're talking 8 hours probably at a minimum per book. So, you know, it's a big investment.
Yeah, of course. Clem's asked the question, what kinds of books have publishers simply lost interest in? Has that happened? Are there some genres that they're no longer interested in picking up?
I think, if I'm really straight about it, that because publishing is quite a female-dominated industry, I think, you know, a male adult protagonist that isn't in crime is almost impossible to sell now.
Right.
Like it just doesn't inspire anyone to be that excited in the publishing industry. It might be a trend, it might swing back, you know, but I think also it's because a lot of the readers, you know, the majority of readers are women. I'm talking about fiction here, actually. If we talk about non-fiction, I don't know. I mean, anything that's racist, sexist, you know, all that kind of stuff, like it's just completely off the table now. Like it's got not a chance in hell of really being published. Another kind of really awkward area actually is if you're writing your main character and you're not from that community, that's extremely problematic as well.
Yeah, of course.
It you know, writing in the past used to be more about imagination and about empathy and about, you know, writing, putting yourself in someone else's shoes and writing from their point of view. But very much now the publishing industry is very focused on not allowing people, I suppose, to write from another person's perspective, from a minority kind of community or culture or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So an emphasis on own stories.
Yeah, definitely an emphasis on own stories. And in fact, own stories has even gone a little bit further now. If anyone's interested, you can look up that hashtag. It's got a monumental amount of information around it on one of those social media platforms. You know, it's even gone beyond that. They actually want to define exactly, you know, the background of the person more so. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Benython, Diane is asking us, to what extent do you work editorially with your authors? Do you have much of a hands-on involvement in their work?
Yeah, look, we do. It's a real range. Some things come to me pretty well formed. Other things I think have really good bones, and you know, I'm happy to work on them. But to be honest, I'm becoming less happy to work on stuff because the amount of time that we spent editing, like for instance, recently I think I've spent about 100 hours editing a book, and I'm really questioning now whether, you know, we can actually make money from it. That's a hell of a lot of time. So what we're thinking about doing now is, if we think something's not quite up to scratch, is actually getting, you know, recommending editors, which are completely arm's length from us, like, and just recommending people and saying, look, it's your responsibility to, you know, get it up to a little bit of a higher level, bring it back to us when it's at a publishable level. Complicated situation, different for every author that comes to us, and I suppose our belief in whether we can, you know, whether it has something that we think we can actually, you know, make enough money from. I mean, just to sort of tell you the figures quickly from our point of view, and this is the complication in publishing, that even if we sell a book for $100,000, you know, our commission is 15%. So we're making $15,000 out of it, which still sounds like a bit of a chunk. But if you think about like the amount of time, effort and energy that goes into it, and then actually that's the rarity of the $100,000. So if you're thinking $10,000, then we're making $1,500 out of a book. you know, it's very, very complicated to spend 100 hours editing a book when you're earning $1,500.
Yeah, of course. Well, look, Laura wants to know if there's more that she can do to attract an agent. And I'm wondering if, you know, should they be going to an editor first to get their work looked at? Or is there something else that Laura could be doing to get her work noticed?
Look, I think just go through that Australian Literary Agents Association website. Polite, succinct, you know, submission. Laura, drop me a note if you want. I can have a look. There might be a really simple answer, but I think, yeah, it's all about really, really good communication. I think part of it is, and I do this before I send stuff to publishers, you know, get your letter checked by a few people, get people to look over it. It's almost impossible to write something fantastic, you know, that doesn't have a mistake in it or isn't like. Another perspective is always great. Obviously, not everyone will give you the right advice, but it's good to at least run something by someone else before you send it, just to see what they think. I think that's really important. Writing groups are great for that. If you have a writing group, you know, those people can be harsh, but they can also be helpful.
We also have resources on our Writing New South Wales website, certainly about our writing groups, but also about submitting work and things that you should bear in mind. One obvious one is to make sure you look at the guidelines listed on the literary agents or the publishers' websites, because they're giving you very clear indications of what it is they're looking for. So make sure you check that out. All right, now this is a question about the design process. So I'm not sure, Benython, if you are able to assist with this, but Melissa asks, The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart has a fabulous cover. How long did it take to design, and was this done when the story was complete or partway through the writing?
You know what, this is a major part of publishing now. And I was saying, don't worry about social media, but one little bit of social media that's definitely worth looking at is HarperCollins Design Australia, their team. They're a phenomenal bunch. Like, they're in-house. There's about 7 of them. You know, it is just such an important part of publishing. So these guys, you know, they're designers. They're always going out in the community. They're looking at artwork. They're looking at trends. They're looking at all sorts of things. And then what they're also doing beyond that is they're actually employing artists to work with. So the artist for Holly Ringland's The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart was actually a woman called Edith Rawa, I think is how you pronounce her name, but I'm not entirely sure. And so, yeah, it was managed in-house. They did that. There was a lot of thought, a lot of energy that went into that jacket, same as their Boy Swallows Universe jacket. There's actually a bit of a kind of arms race on at the moment between publishers to make books something like an item of beauty that you want to kind of keep. It's part of it now. It seems to be because of Instagram and all that kind of stuff that, you know, that there is a lot of power there in having a really affecting jacket.
Yeah, right. I think this will be our last question now, Benython. What sort of author-agent relationship do you hope for when you sign an author? That's a question from Laura.
Well, long term, obviously, we you know, want to keep it going for the eternity of a writer's life, basically, and be there for them the whole time. There are 2 kind of models. There's the friendlier model where, you know, you interact as well as business partners, sort of as friends as well. You know, writing can be very emotional. Writers can be quite emotional. Some writers have a lot of damage in their lives. You know, so you can be their confidant. You can do that kind of thing. Other people would just rather that it was just strictly business, that you just cracked on and, you know, did all the business stuff. So yeah, there's sort of 2 ways to approach it. I think the middle ground for me is probably where I'm at, like, you know, bit of business, bit of friendship. I mean, it is a relationship. It's a complicated relationship, you know, because there are so many sensitivities. And part of the thing too, which is complicated, is because there isn't a tremendous amount of money, like it can be quite stressful as well for an author. You know, trying to survive, trying to get grants, trying to work, trying to bring up kids, trying to, you know, that while you're still trying to find that writing time, and then your book might not sell that well. And, you know, so, I mean, yeah, basically we're there just sort of as a confidant in some ways. Maybe an easier person to speak to than your partner or your friends, or, you know, about, you know, the happiness and the sadness around this kind of quite torrid industry in a way.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for being our guest today, Benython. It's such a privilege to have so many valuable insights from someone with your experience. So thank you so much for sharing with us today. Our next First Friday event will be on the 3rd of September at 12:30 on the Friday, and we'll be talking to Lena Naluz, Executive Director of Diversity Arts Australia. Details will be in our weekly e-newsletter Newsbite and on our website. So no First Friday for the next month, but for September we will be joining you again. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon at another Writing New South Wales event. Farewell.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you.